live on the Land of Confusion podcast, where we're once again brought together our historian panel to talk about what's going on in Ukraine. And this time we had took uh, Clark's excellent advice of sending out the Q&A questions a couple days in advance instead of a week in advance, and got a lot of great questions from the Ricochet members, so which we'll be able to go through. Of course, I'm the host here. I'm the show. I'm David March. I also go by the name of Tory War Writer on the thing, and I've written a lot of articles for various historian magazines, and I wrote a war game in 2012, which was published in 2014, about a certain Russian gentleman invading Poland in the far off year of 2020. So, and this is a C writer who can give you a brief of his bio.
Yeah. My name's Mark Lardis, and I do a lot of writing of history. I've got 40 plus books that I've had published on different aspects of military and naval history. And although I'll admit modern warfare, 21st century warfare isn't my forte, but in many ways, I think this proves that there are certain things about warfare that just do not change over time.
Okay.
And I'm Clark Summers. I have the Ricochet handle of Postmodern Hoplite. 30-year Army veteran on the Army Reserve and National Guard side of the house. I currently am a adjunct professor at Belmont Abbey College in Belmont, North Carolina, where I teach history of Western civilization and various international relations courses. My current course is the current class load includes international law, so I'm kind of elbows deep into that right now. My military career included about 10 years in mechanized infantry and armor units, about 10 years in Army watercraft and logistics, and the last portion, about 10 years in chem, bio, rad, and nuke as a chemical warfare officer. So I did a little bit of a lot of things.
Okay. Do we just want to have what's our impression of how the conflict is going, and then we can get into the answering the questions.
Mark, do you want to lead off?
Might as well. I don't think it's going nearly as well as the Russians had hoped it would go. It's going, I think that at this point, it's really at a tipping point where everything is balanced, and we'll see in the next week where one of three things is going to happen. One is that it'll devolve into a stalemate that will go on for several months. The second possibility is that the Ukrainians could get exhausted and the Russians will finally start moving. However, the third possibility that I'm beginning to see is that it's the Russians that will end up getting exhausted and run out of ammunition, and you may see the Ukrainians start advancing, and that I would not have believed that possible a month ago, but I'm beginning to see some hints of that. At this point, it's the situation is too murky to be sure which way it's going to go. But the one thing I'm certain of is this isn't the war the Russians planned, and this is yet another example of the old rule that it doesn't matter what you plan, the enemy gets a vote.
I concur. I think your outline of your three possibilities are all three of them are sound, and my own impression is that you mentioned one option being you said option number two, the likely, the potential for stalemate. I would argue that has largely been reached, and that it reached that point sooner than I know sooner than I expected. But that was kind of what I did expect to happen, and I think that they're there. The question is what happens going forward. Your two other courses of action, the Ukrainian army may still collapse, and I think that that's a possibility, particularly if a change in government occurs in Kiev. I think that the loss of confidence that there is a central government may result in the regular Ukrainian army collapsing. Um, I think if that does occur, that's just simply going to move it to the low intensity conflict insurgency level faster. Even if the Russian army collapsed, I don't think that a low intensity conflict, long term insurgency can be avoided now, because I really don't see the Russian army collapsing institutionally. Now, again, I could be wrong about all three of these things.
Yeah.
When I look at the shift in focus of resources that Russia is applying, I believe that they're going to attempt to carve out control on the ground in the southeastern corner, establish the land bridge to Crimea, and if they can effect that, what we'll see is the emergence of a hard border that becomes a demilitarized zone between the Russian-controlled portion of Ukraine and the rest of Ukrainian sovereign territory, linking the Donbass with Crimea. And if they can effect that, I think that's where the lines will finally stabilize. How long they're willing to sustain, and it's not going to be a cold war. It's going to be a hot war. It's going to look more like the border between South Korea and North Korea from 53 until 94, quite frankly. Again, I could be completely wrong in all of this, but if I was a betting man, I'd say that's what I think is developing.
Okay. I'm going to disagree with all of you. And my understanding of the situation on the ground is that we're keep applying our perspectives from the West to a situation. To Russia, Ukraine is like Texas being invaded by Mexico. And they're not going to just collapse because this is an existential thing. They have to take Ukraine, and that's going to be what's happening here. They can't afford not to win. So they're going to go for it in a way. And so far, they have decided not to be Mr. Bad Russian. But if they do decide to be Mr. Bad Russian, and some indications are coming down, especially after their ship got blown up today, you could see them do what they did in Grozny and use thermobaric weapons to just smash their way through. And that would be bad. But that's, to me, it's just like clear as day. The Russians, it's not like it's Iraq or Afghanistan in America where it's a foreign adventure and you can go home. This is like Canada being occupied by the Soviet Union. For the Russians, Ukraine has to be neutral at best. So they are not going to take a half measure on this one. And what I'm seeing is that they're fighting in a very different war than what we've used to fight. And I don't think you will have the insurgency you guys seem to happen, because they're basically trying to destroy the Ukrainian army as an entire fighting force, as opposed to what happened in Afghanistan when the Soviets went in, what happened when you went in, and what happened in Iraq, where you had basically the army surrendered and then took all their weapons and went into the field, went home. In Russia, the Russians are just trying to destroy the Ukrainian army completely. And we're seeing this with they haven't been able to do it yet, but every day they seem to be tightening up their cauldrons in the East, which doesn't seem to get a lot of play in the Western media.
Well, the thing is that certainly the Russian position back in the Russo-Japanese War, and we saw how well that worked for them back then. I'm actually seeing a lot of parallels between the Russo-Japanese War and this. The Russians have a larger regular army than the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians really do have the population mobilized and fighting alongside the Ukrainian army. And some
Where are
of
you getting
this,
that from?
the fact that the fact the Russian lines haven't moved.
Well, they're not moving because they're doing encirclement operations.
If that's
it takes
what you
time
want
to reduce salience.
If
We,
that's what you want to believe, go ahead and believe that. Let's see where
I'm
we
not
are a month
believing. That's
from
what
now.
I'm seeing every day on the news.
The thing is, the Russians have a limit on how much ammunition they have. They have a limit on their logistics, and the Russian supply really depends upon railroads, and they don't have railroads into the Ukraine. They're moving trucks from the Kuril Islands to the Russian mainland, and that was spotted by the Japanese. If they're doing that, they are fairly short of transportation.
Oh, I have no doubt that the Russians are fairly short on transportation.
And the thing is that you can't flatten a town if you can't bring the ammunition up.
But they have not been flattening towns, except for Mariupol. So they
Well,
haven't been flattening any
Mariupol
towns
counts.
anywhere.
See,
Mariupol counts.
I'm glad you mentioned Mariupol only because it's been okay. Mariupol has been curious to me just in watching how that has unfolded in the last 4 weeks. Their initial operations appeared from the sources I was seeing to suggest that they recognized how important taking Mariupol was, and having that that in order to affect being able to strategically hold the Donbass and the two breakaway regions, the LPL Luhansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic. Being able to hold those two requires that that region have reliable access to the sea as well. Mariupol would provide that. Now, at some point, making the decision that we're going to flatten Mariupol, perhaps as Maskirovo, as a
No, I know
masking
what's going on there.
operation. But why choose that port? Why choose that one?
That's
Because
where
they
all
need it
these
intact.
neo
And I find it curious that
are.
they chose that one.
That's where all the neo NAZIs are. I don't want to say it because YouTube doesn't like that word.
Well,
So
again,
apparently, when the Russians, this is something they screwed up on. Apparently, the Russians thought there was only 5,000 of these guys there, and there's 15,000 of them.
Well,
so
but are we sure that 15,000 is made up of those types of?
Yeah, it's pretty clear. We have a lot of Greek refugees. Apparently, Greeks, not surprisingly, are all over the Black Sea, right? So they're coming back home they've escaped from there, and they're going on Greek television, and Greek TV anchors are like, so how was it when the Russians came and it was bad? And they're like, thank God the Russians arrived. We were being held hostage in our buildings. We were not allowed to leave because of the Azov battalions who are heavily invested in this city. So that's why it's be turning into basically Hungary in 2022. The Budapest situation. So there's a lot of the bad guys that the Ukrainians have, the Banderistas, those Azov Italian guys all seem to be right now in Mariupol. And the Russians, for very strong reasons, hate those guys. And that's why that's become such a big fight.
But without arguing against any of that, why destroy the city? Why level it? Appreciating that, or at least from the perspective of, you're going to need an intact port. You're going to need an intact port city. That simple encirclement, isolation, and then securing the ground, and then if necessary, you go back to conventional siege and you starve it.
And that's what they're doing everywhere else. But no, apparently it is very personal in this situation. Sometimes you have,
but again, that once you introduce that it becomes personal, then that suggests that the decision making is no longer strategically sound. Now,
I agree. They should probably just isolate it and do what you're doing. But you didn't have. It's hard for. I'm of Polish descent. In 1939, and between 1939 and 1945, the Germans wiped out 1/6 of Poland. In between 41 and 45, 20 million Slavs died from these people. emotions went out as part of the problem here. It is that kind of situation. I understand it's hard for. It's like 9/11 times a million, right? You guys weren't thinking too clearly after that happened. The Russians aren't thinking too clearly when it comes to this situation.
Well, it's going to cost them.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it does.
The thing is that Russia does not have that big an economy. They've got an economy the size of Italy.
So
They're a
what?
big country, but
Iran seems to have a even tinier, 1/20th a fraction of the economy of Russia, and they're still the terror of the Middle East.
right, but they are not having terribly great success projecting power out of Iran.
Seems I see a lot. Then why are they until this week the number one state sponsor of terrorism, the big boogeyman of America and Israel? All sorts of people seem to think that they're a big deal.
There's a difference between terrorism and projecting power.
Yeah.
You can create disorder very, very easily, but taking and holding territory is a different issue.
The Russians are not interested in taking and holding territory in Ukraine in the way that you keep thinking they are. They are interested. They are trying to do what we used to do in the 19th century and the 18th century, and basically for the 20th century. They are trying to destroy the enemy army and then making the capital come to their terms. We're not used to thinking about that anymore, but that's how we used to handle things all over Europe. And that's what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. They keep telling us this. When they have their few press conferences, Putin has his Empire of Lies speech he gave. He's like, I'm not here to conquer and absorb Ukraine into Russia. I'm here to destroy the Ukrainian army's ability to fight me back. So he doesn't need to. He's not doing the things we keep projecting onto him how we do things, and that's not how he's doing things, or they're doing things, I should say.
I guess I appreciate the argument that you're making, and perhaps I'm just simply being a 20th and 21st century officer. That I can recognize the genius of a Napoleon.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Napoleon failed in doing exactly that against Russia.
Yeah.
That even taking the capital and destroying the Russian army that was in front of him, but as an effective force, that simply melted back away from contact, leaving him holding the ground that he was holding, and thus ultimately realizing that just because he was holding the capital and there was no standing army in front of him, the moment he began to try to consolidate his lines purely for logistics reasons, because he couldn't support his own army in Moscow. That was the first model that came to mind. Now, this was how Prussia won the Franco-Prussian War: destroy the French army, take Paris. So I appreciate that what you're saying is historically accurate. I'm just questioning whether in the first 20 years of the 21st century, whether that model is in fact has the means to be successful. Now, as I would point back to the beginning, Dave, you're exactly right. The Ukrainian army could collapse tomorrow.
Right.
I don't see evidence that it is. However, I would say that it certainly is a possibility.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that Russia is going to withdraw their forces once achieving their political ends. They will occupy as much of Ukraine as they believe honor requires, provided they can do it as the victor.
Yeah.
But if they have to fight a continual insurgency, whether it's what they set out to do, whether that was their strategic concept or not, I think ceases to become really the question we need to be asking. Will the Ukrainian people support an insurgency from within the Ukrainian populace? Indications are there, but it's too soon to say.
Yeah.
It just simply, no one can say that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
but I do believe there are indicators that suggest it certainly is a viable option.
Yeah,
Not
certainly
viable,
it
I mean
depends on where
preferable.
they go.
I mean, it's a possible course of action that may occur.
Yeah, it depends on where they go. If he keeps to where the Russian portions of the countryside are, which is maybe up to the Dnieper River, if he keeps on that side, he's pretty safe. If he decides to go into Western Ukraine, which he's only done right now through missile launches, if he decides to go into Lublin and Tarpanol and all these where the traditional Ukrainian heartland, he's going to have a bit of a difficult time. But you got to remember, the Ukrainian government policy since 2014 of Ukrainianization is not popular in the Russian-speaking peoples, where they were forced to change their names. Literally had to change their names to be Ukrainian. You're no longer allowed to speak your language. You are no longer allowed to teach your language in schools. Your television stations were banned. The political leader parties were banned, and the opposition leaders were placed under house arrest for treason. And that guy got rescued and has mysteriously disappeared. And some think he's in Moscow right now. So I'm just saying it all depends on where the Russians stop.
I think you're overestimating the appeal of Russia to the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. And a big reason for that is what has happened in Donbass since 2014. The thing is that Putin turned that over to a gang of thugs that make, well, pretty much the Chechens look civilized.
I don't know about that. I think I've been looking into that. I've been reading International Red Cross and other sources. That's not necessarily true what's going on in those two republics.
But the thing is, the people in the Donbass...
the Donbass has been shelled repeatedly by the Ukrainian side at a rate of like 20-1. And 14,000 Russian speakers have been killed in the Donbass by the Ukrainians.
But the thing is that the people running the Donbass have run out all the businesses. The Russian-speaking Ukrainians that are in Ukraine were doing quite well, and they were watching their cousins in the Donbass get impoverished by a government that had no compunctions to rob them of everything that they had. And if they could get a ruble, in Russia, the bureaucrats will cost you 10 rubles to get one, but the people running Donbass, it's more like, oh, we get 1 ruble. Yeah, we destroyed 10,000 rubles worth of property to get it, but we've got ours.
I'm not really sure where you're hearing all this from.
Well, I sent you that link.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the link. Sorry. So
okay.
Is it in my messages?
It was in the first message, and I've posted it elsewhere. Okay. But there was a very interesting analysis of what's going on, and basically, the Ukrainians don't blame Ukrainians for what's going on; they blame Putin. And that this guy's argument was the most effective de-Russification that has been done was done by Putin's actions in the Donbass, in which Putin is trying to create chaos in order to give him an opportunity to sweep in and be the savior. And he did that successfully a couple of other times. But the contrast between the Russian-controlled portions of Russian-speaking Ukraine and the Ukrainian-controlled portions of Russian-speaking Ukraine are very stark, and the Russian-speaking Ukrainians are thinking we're better off staying with the Ukrainians. And yeah, the Russians have been saying, oh no, they're going to welcome us with open arms.
I haven't seen any reports of Russians saying that. I watch RT occasionally. I see other places. I don't see, and I get some behind the guy like expats American expats living in both Ukraine and in Russia, and they're not describing any of that kind of stuff.
The thing is that
seems once again our projections.
Well, again, the day of the invasion, a RT announcement went up where they had stated that they had taken over Ukraine and that the Russian-speaking Ukrainians were welcoming the Russian liberators. That article came down almost immediately,
Right.
because, well, let's face it, it didn't go the way they'd planned on it going.
I just don't see that. Kind of reminds me of when the marching band went into Finland in 1940. But there's always some people making stuff up. You guys, Clark, were you really expecting that the Iraqis, when you invaded Iraq, were going to welcome with you open arms and flowers?
Well, from the military, from the operational side of it, no. As a matter of fact, the hope was that the Iraqi civilians stayed as far away as possible,
Right.
because once again, from the military, there was from the operational concept. Having spoken with some of the guys who were on the CENTCOM planning team, their concept was that they wanted the Iraqi civilians to stay as far away, out of the way. There was no desire to have them become strategically significant. The expectation is that all of the formations of the Iraqi army that had largely stood down and had not been in direct combat, and so the Iraqi regular army, not considering the Revolutionary Guard units, and that upon ceasefire and armistice, there was this pause, and the expectation is that all of those formations would remain in their barracks, in post, under their own command and control of their officers, and just wait for the political transition to occur. When the order came down to disband all of those forces, there were other things happening, and I want to be careful how I frame this, because I don't think I'm revealing any great strategic secrets. That all of it's called phase 5 operations that are supposed to occur at the conclusion of the shooting, and this was the responsibility of the State Department to plan and prepare for. And throughout the entire planning process, every time State Department was asked, do you have your plan? What do you need from us to execute your plan? Oh no, State Department says we're fine, everything is great. And then boom, suddenly there they are. And as the story as it was told to me by an officer, I wasn't in the room, but an officer who was, says, our CENT commander basically turns and looks over at the representative from State Department and says, now, you need to execute phase 5. And their look was blank. and they go, we perhaps ought to, we need to figure out what we're going to do. Hence the reason why
Jesus.
Central Command doing what was part of the ethic of, okay, we can't fail. The mission can't fail. We're not going to let State Department fail at this. We're going to jump in and start doing this. And that was probably the worst thing they could do, because the moment CENTCOM took over what wasn't their mission, they owned it. They bought it. They owned it. And they were never prepared to run that occupation from the occupation side of it, other than provide security and keep the peace. And once it was clear that and now you've got all of the generals who are saying what they really want to say is, this isn't my job, this isn't what I was tasked to do. Well, in the professional military ethic, you don't get to say that. It's yes sir, 3 bags full. You salute the flag, and you're handed a really awful mission, and you go out and you do your best. And most of the time, you find a solution. No matter how painful it is, you find a solution, because failure is just not considered an option. Right. Well, in the case of Iraq, it turns out that all of the problems that proceeded from the poorly executed occupation, quite frankly, and this is coming from a soldier, this is coming from someone who's looking at it and saying the blame should have been squarely laid at the feet of Department of State and the rest of the civilian interagency, who not only weren't prepared to do what their job was, they were perfectly happy to chuck it into the laps of basically the Army, who got hung out to dry. Now, trying to compare Iraq in 2003 with Ukraine in 2022 really is
no,
probably
my only suggestion was just like, there's a lot of civilians saying one thing, and then the Army actually has the realistic.
Yes, and I would say appreciating Mark that everything, my general policy is I discount 50% of everything that I'm getting in open source from both sides.
Right.
Do I believe that there is a strong case that can be said that the Ukrainian military's handling of the insurgency planted by Russia in the Donbass was too heavy-handed and over forceful, worsening the situation? Certainly.
Yeah.
However, do I also see that in the last 4 weeks, if the majority of the civilian population in eastern Ukraine was really hostile to the Ukrainian army, they couldn't function. There are myriad ways that civilians can hold up military operations without ever having to fire a shot. And I don't see evidence of that in the reports that I am seeing. So it appears that the Ukrainian army still retains central control, military efficacy, and freedom of maneuver for them to pick where they're going to choose to fight and where they're not. And where they're not wanting to fight, they are withdrawing and controlling the tempo of operation. Now, it could be, as you say, that the Russian operation concept is light touch and avoid until we can bring a Ukrainian army formation to decisive action. We're going to avoid contact and conserve combat power. That is a very real possibility. I'm not sure I'm convinced, but I acknowledge that it's very real. That being said, it appears to me that the situation operationally has not significantly changed in the last 3 weeks, other than the not unsurprising use by the Russians of heavier and heavier artillery, both tube and missile.
Right.
That shouldn't surprise us.
Yeah.
Artillery has always been referred to as the Red Army's god of war.
Right.
They do it well, and they do it heavier than any other modern army.
Right. The things that I would like to point out, though, is the Russians still don't have air supremacy, and I'm not even sure they've got air superiority.
Oh, they have.
They have
2,000 airplanes.
Air superiority is unquestioned. But you're right; they don't have air supremacy.
Yeah,
but
they haven't sought it. That's which is interesting.
Right. The thing is that I'm wondering about the readiness of the Russian Air Force. I'm also wondering about the readiness of the Russian Army. And I'm beginning to believe that the Russians may not have the power to impose the campaign on the Ukraine that they want to impose.
I'm not seeing that, but I have a different theory of the war than you do. So
right, no, I understand that, but it still comes down to the number of tanks you have, the number of artillery pieces you have, the number of shells that you have, and how you get them to the front. And one of the cannier things that the Ukrainian army has been doing is targeting Russian transportation. And the Russians really never had a strong truck transportation network. Now, I'm not basing that on what I'm reading.
I fully agree.
I'm
This
basing
is
that on what I've
I,
read
I'm
from
going to
Strat.
mention one thing. This is actually answering Brian Stevens' question. So this is great.
Yeah,
I
but
was going to say, we're about 36 minutes into it.
Yeah,
We owe
so
it to the
we're answering
people who
questions.
submitted questions to try to answer them.
Yeah.
right. The problem is it's as you said, you have to discount an awful lot of what you're saying. But do I believe the Russians have suffered 16,000 casualties? Yeah, I can believe that, at least in part because that was a Russian source. The Ukrainians are claiming what, 40,000,
Yeah, I don't
which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But 16,000,
Mhm.
yeah, 10,000 dead, yeah, I can see that. I mean, 26,000. The Russians released something that said they had suffered almost 10,000 dead and a little over 16,000 wounded, and that sounds credible to me. But the thing is that how many men do they really have? That if that's true, they've taken the equivalent of 1/10 of their army as casualties. That's a lot of casualties to take in your army. And that's why I'm beginning to doubt that the Russians are going to succeed. And, the one thing that I do believe is that the Ukrainian army and the Russian army are fighting two entirely different wars.
True.
And the Russians are fighting a very centralized Soviet-style campaign. And the Ukrainians seem to be going with autonomous and independent company actions and doing a lot of deep dives into the Russian rear with small units. Probably the smartest thing they can do.
True.
But, the thing is, every time we've seen a Soviet-style army go up against a Western-style army, the Soviet-style army has ended up getting its head handed to them.
You mean like we saw in Vietnam in 75 and 72?
The Viet Cong were not fighting.
I'm not talking about the Viet Cong. I'm talking about the Army and Republic of North Vietnam.
They were not fighting a Soviet-style campaign because they pushed
75?
No. Well, the thing is that even there, you were not getting the division commander giving all of the commands. They already had a long tradition of pushing responsibility down.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. And that's the difference. To some extent, the North Vietnamese learned an awful lot about how to fight a war from the United States. And a few years ago, I spent a couple of weeks in Vietnam, and the Vietnam War is now as far in the past as the Civil War was in the 1920s.
I want to explain the argument you're making because we all know what you mean, but people at home won't know what you're talking about. So what Mark's talking about is that Russians have a poor NCO structure and lieutenant structure. So what used to happen, especially in the Soviet era, when you were a lieutenant and you had basically a book of all the things you can do. And if you had any problems, you had to call up to a higher command. And there was some colonel in a headquarters somewhere who had to tell you what to do if you got through those 20. So that's what he's saying here.
Right. And
anyone who's familiar with colonels will know that that's a dubious course of action to begin with.
It is a terrible idea. So,
but the thing is that in a society like Putin's Russia, you can't afford to have an army made up of independent thinkers.
That's not necessarily true.
It's very difficult.
He's taking 10,000 casualties like we think he is. I'm sure unit cohesion is broken down, but he does seem to have. I'm reading freaking books on the freaking modern Russian army.
I would say
250 to 100,000 of like what we would consider a Western army.
Yeah, Dave. I agree with you that the concept, the concept for structure of the command and control structure within the modern Russian army, the contemporary Russian army, was designed to attempt to address this shortfall of the old Red Army. But what we're seeing in the field is that what what was a necessary generational change may not in fact have been successful.
Right.
Right.
That's
That
what I'm
that
at.
But like, I just
recognizing
want to
that
point out that it's not necessarily true in all cases. They might be falling back on the old tried true stuff because they've taken so many casualties amongst their
Well, but
class. They
again,
did make an attempt to get through.
look at the
a way.
casualties they've taken among generals and colonels. How many colonels and generals did we get killed in the Iraq War, the Gulf War, in Afghanistan? Part of
yeah,
the
that
reason,
I don't know the answer to that
The
question, but it
answer
was
is
a
very
low enough
low, but
number that
that's a whole other type of campaign. We have, and the Russians do have a history and a tradition of having their generals lead from the front in a
now
way that no Western army does now.
I've got an anecdote to tell you about that, dealing specifically with the spearhead in Iraqi freedom, which I'm going to set aside for a moment because Dave, I really do want to come back and give us. Are there other questions that
So
Ricochet members that we should get to?
Okay, so first off, E. Herring is asking about the WMDs. Do we think he's going to use Putin's going to use them to win? I don't think it's going to be Putin who does it. I think there'll be, like we saw in Syria, a false flag. Is it true that or Ukrainian propaganda, the Russians are kidnapping children? My understanding is that no, it's not children are being kidnapped, but there are refugee flows going both to Ukraine and to Russia, and some people are choosing to go to Russia or just having to evacuate to Russia because the west to Ukraine is going to go into a war zone. And this is being claimed by the Ukrainians as kidnapping.
Yeah, I completely discount reports that the Russians are kidnapping civilians. Once again, it smacks to me. It just has the feel of Ukrainian propaganda. It's simply there is no tactical or operational advantage. It simply encumbers your logistics chain with it. It slows things down and hurts you in the one thing that you don't need, which is getting materials forward.
Right.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the stories that we heard at the start of the Kuwait War, the Gulf War.
Yeah.
With the Iraqis looting hospitals and
throwing babies out of incubators on the floor, and that all turned to be like nonsense. I know one other situation. What was I going to say? Oh, when we're talking about Ukrainian propaganda, these are the type of people who think it's a good idea to put a doctor out on TV saying how he's castrating Russian prisoners of war. Seriously, that went out over international television. That's what we're dealing when we're dealing with Ukrainian propaganda.
I don't think he said he was. I think he said he wanted to. But either way, it's stupid.
I have to confess, gentlemen, I missed that one. So again, I would discount that one as saying, okay, I don't believe you. Next point. Now, that being said,
you can always find some hotheads that'll say stupid things.
Yeah,
this is very true. Now, but to E. Harrington's other question, do I actually don't believe that the use of chemical weapons at this point it offers no tactical or operational advantage. The situation on the ground is so compacted that attempting to use chemical weapons against tactical formations is so difficult to control, and so it just is if you're using them so as to degrade the logistics and support capability of your opponent, yes, there is some tactical and operational advantage to that. But in this situation, the likelihood of civilian populated areas being affected, that I just simply don't see the Russian commanders, if they're given the operational control themselves, they're going to say no.
Yeah.
Well,
if it does happen, then again, I could be completely mistaken about all of this, but I simply don't see it having any military advantage, tactically or operationally, and having huge strategic disadvantage.
Right. Like,
I'm going to give another reason why I don't think it's going to happen. And that is, I don't think the Russians rolled into the Ukraine intending to use chemical weapons. That means that in order to get them to the battlefield, they have to get them there from Russia, and they're already critically short of transportation.
right.
So,
Yeah,
Here is what happened a few days ago. Supposedly, the small town in Ukraine, which had a very large chemical plant, and the rumor is that the Ukrainians were rigging it up to explode to try and blame on the Russians. The Russians came out and claimed that this happened, and suddenly the mayor in that town said, "No, there's nothing like this happening here. We don't know what you're talking about." In a very skeptical, shady way. There is definitely people, I would not be surprised, in the Ukrainian regime who are stupid enough to try and do a false flag.
well, but
Because
again,
they know that would be possibly the only way they could get their no-fly zone.
well, the thing is, though, that if you're talking about a city that has a large chemical plant, getting an industrial accident like that is fairly easy to occur. For example, Bhopal in India. And when you're fighting a battle around a place like that, you can expect that something really, really bad can happen.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think you're seeing that as a matter of doctrine.
Yeah, no, there are some crazy people running around in Ukraine doing crazy things. These people shot one of the members of their negotiation team. The guys that they sent off to negotiate with Russia's in Belarus, the first day of it, they arrested him and shot him as a traitor. So there are some weird things. As much as we keep talking about how we think bad things are happening in Russia to Putin, we keep seeing actually bad things happen in Kiev.
Do we have any other questions that we haven't touched on?
Okay, yeah, we have a lot.
Okay,
one of the great stories of this is the utter failure of Russian propaganda and the resounding Ukrainian propaganda success. What happened? Do either of you have something to say about that? I know what my thoughts are. Okay.
Well,
the Ukrainians are more
I've stated my position on the information flow coming from both of them, and I think that's just more experience has taught me. I discount everything by 50%.
Right.
I would question whether or not Russian propaganda has been as ineffective as it's been claimed to be, and only from the perspective is the Russians have a story to tell. They have their perspective, and a solid majority of the Russian civilian population are behind their government and are supporting them. This shouldn't surprise us.
All countries naturally rally to their flag unless they're really bad in a time of crisis like this. It takes years of losing a war to lead to the kind of things that we saw in 1918 with an extensive blockade. All these guys who thought that they just send a bunch of sanctions and thought that Russia would cave in a week. That turned out to be not true, because that's not how these things work in real life.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the difference that this is part of the different environment that we're talking about between warfare in Europe in the 19th century and the 20th century, and we're now into the 21st. This war, one of the maps that I like to use, regularly refreshes with open source information that's coming from observers on the ground from all over Ukraine, and that every time I look at that and go, wow, this is the amount of information flow that is coming is tremendous, and just simply attempting to sift through it becomes, there's a part of me that wishes I was, could just sit and follow all this and try to track it in real time. But the fact is, I can't. I still have to go to class and teach.
Yeah.
So I dip my toe in when I can, starting from the perspective of how much has really changed on the ground. That in addition to the spot reports, in terms of the big muscle moves, where can we confirm The Russians are effectively operating. Where's the Ukrainian army effectively operating?
Mm.
What's it look like on the ground? What's all of the source intel? And that's really what it comes down to. We're seeing a new face of war
Mm.
that is unique to the 21st century.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll say this about the propaganda situation. Russians are only really caring about their propaganda on their domestic audience. They don't care about us. They really don't give a damn. They're not like the United States having daily press conferences. On the other side, Ukrainians are backed up by all the power of Hollywood, every major news network, and major American network, all the networks, everyone around the world, Facebook, big tech are all on the side of the Ukrainians. How could the Russians possibly compete with the other thing in the propaganda sphere against all of that?
Let me point out one more thing about Ukraine. One of their big exports prior to this war was visual media. Just as an example, my granddaughter was fascinated by this show called Dave and Ava. And a couple of years ago, I tried to get, swag from that show because of it. And I discovered it was being created in the Ukraine. So that's part of it. They are very plugged into the entertainment industry because that's a fairly big part of their economy.
Not to mention their president and half his cabinet are either the president's a former actor, half his cabinet are screenwriters or assistant directors from his TV show. And I'm not kidding.
I know that, but you're underscoring my point.
Yeah, right.
So
did we handle EJ Herring's question?
I think so. I think
Okay.
we took care of that one. The next question we had up is one we kind of covered. I think we all believe that's entirely possible, that the Russian figures of 9,000 dead are very possible. Certainly, given the way they're fighting this war, they're not fighting like we've done in previous things where you just seize the capital and disband the army. They're actually trying to destroy it, in my opinion. The question I like from this one here is, and if so, would it be reasonable to assume that the ratio wounded to dead indicates extremely poor battlefield medic capabilities of the Russians?
I had one of my source contacts is a young Army veteran, E5, E4, E5, a couple tours downrange before he got out, and I met him in my classes. But he's been really closely plugged into the various information streams that are coming on the veteran. And this is multinational veteran networks. And there's apparently all these really fascinating sources. And he was the one who first identified this, to me, the significance of the lack of preparation, not in immediate combat triage, which the Russians seemed well prepared for, but the intermediate step of from battlefield triage into the combat field hospitals, stabilization, and then getting them out to full medical care. And it was that middle link. He was the one who pointed that out to me, and it's been fascinating to see that so many simple things that you would have expected the Russians to have anticipated,
right?
Things as simple as survival blankets, the necessary facilities for keeping stabilization and body temperature. So the Russian soldiers were surviving, and once again, initial combat triage. They were getting to the field hospitals and dying there in much higher rates than modern battlefield medicine, which is no secret.
Yeah.
And that would be what I might point to, that is very clearly some link broke down in that piece.
Yeah, but again, that goes back to their weak transportation network.
I'm not sure that it was transportation as much of somehow they didn't anticipate that particular need, because the amount of time they had to pre-position the stockage, it's from crossing the line of departure, line of contact, from starting combat. Yes, then forward push of supplies becomes the next link. But in that initial 72 hours, when you're operating within 10 to 25 kilometers of your forward operating bases, all of that preposition of stockage Okay,
Right.
and again, I'm speaking as a retired U.S. Army officer. That this would have been, we would not have even started planning the tactics until we had anticipated what the logistics support requirement was baseline going to be, and the first thing considered was, how are we going to get that stuff pre-positioned? It appears to me, I could be mistaken, but it appears to me that was not anticipated. There were certain key medical supplies that were positioned, but then scores of other line items that simply were overlooked.
The thing is, I think that you're seeing so many deaths because the medevac isn't working right. And, that's one thing the United States is very, very good at is medevac and getting troops to the hospital in what's called the golden hour.
Yes, but that golden hour, that's the combat triage and getting them to the field hospitals. Now, you may be right that they're simply not prioritizing the medevac from the combat field hospitals back to the zone of the interior to Russia.
That's
and I can
kind of
totally
what I
see
think.
that, okay, as screwed up as the road networks are, they're simply prioritizing. Nothing comes out unless the road in is already prioritized.
Yeah.
I'll also point out this also, to me at least, gives evidence that they thought this was going to be a relatively bloodless campaign and it was going to be over in 3 days. Because that would be another reason you wouldn't have the stuff you were talking about.
I just don't think the Russians think those things through. I think that might be just their. I understand you guys, but I think that Russian generals are more concerned about bullets and guns and food,
right?
Sometimes the medical things. And from what I'm reading, some of the stuff about the Russian, the generals at the top are more concerned about those. We still have a bit of the old, as we say, Russian army priorities are not the medicine as much as we hope.
I certainly can't disagree with. I can't disagree with you. Only from the perspective of, I can't imagine. I can't imagine being a regimental commander and not have these and not. But then again, I had 30 years of it being drilled into me. Okay,
right.
I mean, I had an entire career of this being just over and over and over. So, okay, my Russian counterpart who is in the field, he didn't have 30 years of that experience. He had 30 years of something else. But the proof ends up being in the pudding is that they're not in a position to fully execute their operational concept, even if the campaign is still progressing along the lines that they had intended. I disagree with you that that's the case, but I acknowledge you could be completely right.
We'll find out when the after action report's done.
We'll find out when it's done. Okay, the next question. I don't want to talk through all of the people who made the effort to send us questions.
Because I didn't really have anything to other than that. What is the current combat capability of the Romanian Ukrainian military? I think we've covered a lot of that. This is from Jerry Giordano, but he's asking about. I've heard reports the Russians principally targeted the Ukrainian army, not the cities, but I don't know if that is correct. That's what I'm seeing. I have a lot of people who are like, I'm listening to podcasts from people like one guy in Kharkov is an example. Basically, I don't know if you two are familiar with what the Marines did at the Second Battle of Fallujah.
When you say familiar with it, familiar in what way?
In the sense that they didn't. Basically, they besieged the city. They tried to evacuate all the civilians out as much as they could, and then they went in when they were down to the last 10%. And that seems to be what they're doing in Kharkov. That's what they tried to do a bit in Mariupol, but the people who were there were preventing them from doing that because they don't want the desertions that this policy tends to lead to. But basically, they're not trying to take out the cities in the way we normally would think we would try to take out cities. Like the one guy in Kharkov, he says, "Yeah, sure." You'll hear in Western media reports the city's destroyed. He's like, most of the city's still here. We're a city of 1.5 million people. It takes a lot to blow up a city.
Yeah.
There's like 5 suburbs city blocks that were destroyed because the Ukrainian army tried to defend there, but the Russians are not invading the cities in the way that we're used to seeing in other places.
Well, I wouldn't. I mean, I have to be honest with you. I was surprised at the amount of resources that were being committed to Kiev.
Oh, I found out what the speculation is similar to what happened in the U.S. Civil War with Richmond. You leave a large force threatening Richmond, so the Ukrainians have to put a large force defending Richmond, and then Sherman and Grant go and try to bring Lee to heel. That seems to be what I'm hearing coming out of Ukraine.
I'd have to go back and get a much higher resolution than I currently have of the forces that are actually arrayed there.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm surprised at I was surprised at the level of resources that remain committed to Kiev. And again, I confess, I can't help but think like an American. I can't help but think like a Westerner. And you bypass the cities completely. You don't. If the goal is to bring the Ukrainian army to heel and bring them into decisive combat, then you waste no resources. You isolate cities. And if the Ukrainian army is in the city, you do a tight siege and you starve them out if necessary. If you've got them contained, then you have them where you want them so long as they can't maneuver. But if the Ukrainian army has maneuver space and is effectively able to withdraw, then you have to go after them. And for some reason, those decisive engagements have not appeared to happen yet in great enough number to cause the Ukrainian regular army to collapse. Now, as I say, Dave, I believe you when you say that's their goal and objective.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'd love to have that decisive battle and be done with it.
That's what I keep hearing. It's going to happen any day now. But the problem is, I've been hearing it happen any day now for 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah, that's after our last conversation. That first week, I was looking for that for literally for the next 3 days, and then after 3 days, I'm going, okay, well, let's just keep monitoring.
Yeah.
And again, totally acknowledge my biases. I can't help but look at this and go, where's the pursuit that's going to bring about this decisive battle? Is the Russian concept to fight this like McClellan's Peninsular Campaign focused on Richmond, or is it Grant's 1864 campaign of shift left and pursue where the Army of Northern Virginia goes? Pursue it.
To be what I'm hearing, but I think they got distracted by all the people, their old hatred in Mariupol.
I think there's another factor that may be overlooked, and it's the one I keep hitting on. I think the Ukrainians have conducted an excellent campaign against Russian transportation, and the reason they're not pursuing is they can't bring up enough ammunition and fuel to pursue.
Mark, that's well said, and I agree that there's a great deal to that. The degree to which it can be confirmed, from my perspective, I just got to admit, I'm going by hunches and
there's also one other thing that we keep forgetting about. One thing that I've mentioned a few times other places, but I haven't mentioned here. Ukraine is the size of Texas.
Yeah.
And we keep it like the Russians have conquered the entire equivalent of the entire United Kingdom in their 4 weeks of campaigning. Like, we keep thinking like we are talking about a front that stretches from, say, New York City to Chicago.
And again, I understand that.
Yeah.
But until the Ukrainians quit, the Russians really are stuck.
Yeah.
And the problem for the Russians is that the Ukrainians have a place to retreat to, and the Russians need to defeat the Ukrainian army. And the deeper they go into the Ukraine, the harder that's going to be. Now, it's possible that they may just dig in and, create a demilitarized zone. But I don't see them doing that at this point, because that would be viewed as a Russian defeat.
Right. No.
Uh,
I think that there's also the fact that the First Guards Tanks Army which seems to have a lot of the best stuff the Russians had, is sitting in Belarus, waiting for something. I won't get into the show what they're up to, because we have to get through our questions. Raxlin asks, do we know whether or not the javelins and NLAWs have been effective as they appear to be, or is it more Western Ukrainian propaganda point? I haven't really been paying attention to that at all.
You can't confirm one way or the other, but from the lack of Russian movement, they've been somewhat effective.
Yeah. Okay.
They have been effective when they've been successfully deployed. Once again, from one of the sources that is shared with me, is the biggest single factor that's keeping the javelins from being more widely used. They have lots of javelin rounds. They have lots of missiles.
Oh, yeah.
What they're lacking is the batteries to operate the tracking device once connected to the missile. So right now, the controlling factor in the use of the javelins is the availability of the batteries to operate the tracker.
Okay.
When they have the batteries, bam, the javelins are working slicker than snot on a doorknob.
Okay.
But they're limited by, once again, it comes back to, they're limited by a logistic consideration that when all of those javelin systems were being imported and sent to Ukraine, did anyone stop to think, put all of the necessary parts in the same pallet?
Nope.
So when they're employed, yes, they're very effective. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if it was a javelin missile that struck and hit the sweet spot on the Russian troop ship, the logistics support vessel that landed, hit it in the right spot, and you can start that kind of fire on that size of vessel.
Yeah.
Now, hit the wrong spot, and you leave a big hole that causes and I don't know what missile system they used.
I'll point out, it's very easy to hit the right spot on a large unarmored transport that's filled with ammunition and fuel. They don't have good fire control aboard essentially a civilian ship. And the most dangerous part of that javelin isn't the warhead, it's the unexpended fuel that's there that catches fire and sets fire to what can burn on that ship. And I suspect that's what happened. Certainly,
so I don't know what missile system was used, but I'm confident enough in the capabilities.
I'm going to take Seawriter. This is his area.
Yeah, this is right your wheelhouse.
Yeah, let's go back to the Falklands War. The reason the Exocet was so deadly wasn't the warhead; it was the fuel that set the ship on fire afterwards.
And a warship out of magnesium.
Yeah, and a warship generally has better fire control, fire protection, and damage control than a merchant ship does.
Yes, certainly.
I've actually been writing about that with the U.S. Navy's raid in the South China Sea in 1945, and they were targeting civilian ships, and one hit would typically sink one. So
next, let's get our
next
once again. I get deep into the naval arcana here.
So James Salerno asking us, what do we think of what is the Russian POV on all the accusations that have been levied against him, saying that that they installed the president, interfered in our elections, calling for bounties on our soldiers, creating fake laptop. He was like, the fact that all these things were, we know were crackpot conspiracies, but were seriously taken.
I can see the Russians taking two takes on that. One is, we don't care what you think. The other one would be, damn, we're good.
Yeah, that was always my impression.
So,
yeah, I'm not sure I understand James's question, and even if I did, I think I'd probably defer to others. I'm here. I'm here as a soldier, and I'm going to be real careful about any speculation on things that I know I'm not qualified to have an opinion on.
Okay, so we had one from CT Law asking, can Z offer Putin a way out? Basically, say, hey, ignore all this stuff and we'll give you a bunch of money. I think that's already happening, but in a different way. They've got themselves a solid military alliance, and it did not help when the United States threatened first India and then China. I'm sorry, everything I can tell, the Chinese do not take well to threats.
No, especially
Yeah,
from
and I would say
president.
both of those diplomatic initiatives really are more a matter of they indicate the degree of lack of coherent strategic policy on the part of the current administration.
Yeah.
Um, and add that to the litany of foolish things that and lack of competence that the current administration has, again, from a national military strategy and from that perspective alone.
Mhm.
um, I bear I'll keep whatever personal animus I have to myself, but speaking as just a retired military professional, the fact of the matter is, this administration has not indicated that it has any coherent strategic vision, or
Mhm.
it. This is not the A team. This is not the B team. It's questionable whether they've got the C team. They simply are floundering from soundbite to soundbite with no single coherent.
I'll explain
So
it easily. This is what happens when you elect a group of people who took the West Wing as their method of operation.
the thing I will say is,
Dave,
look,
this is me not arguing with you.
yeah, the thing I will say is just look at Biden's history. He has what, a 30-40 year history of making the wrong decision on foreign policy issues
50.
every time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned we almost got into a sidebar argument about the collapse of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam in
Mhm.
75. That was Biden,
Yep.
simply
Yep.
because as young senator from Delaware who had gained far more influence than he had intelligence to go with it, he was the one who convinced the Senate not to support the forces in the field in Vietnam with the air support that in fact had been assured. And who knows how the fight in 75 would have gone if the Army of the Republic of Vietnam had been provided the air cover
Yeah.
in order to integrate their ground tactics, which they had been trained and built for. Hello, welcome to Afghanistan in
Right.
2021.
Yep.
The
Right.
same exact strategic
Mhm.
defeat.
So, my view is whenever Biden has a choice between two options, he won't pick the worst of the two. He'll find a third one that's even worse.
Right.
So,
Again, can't argue with you, Mark.
Okay. So we had a question from Roberto. This space available for advertising. He's asking about an analysis from ISW. I think he's like, do we agree with the conclusion? I think he should just watch the stream. All of the questions he's asking for were covered earlier in the stream. You guys think one thing, I think another, and his question is answered by the stream.
Yeah, Roberto, I'd have to say that I have relied upon ISW's graphics. I think that they are some of the better and higher quality ones that I've seen,
Mhm.
and so as a result, that tends me to trust their analysis. But I can't refer specifically to the one you're referring to at this case
Mhm.
because
He was talking about
I'm
the
not up to
stalemate.
speed on it.
and
And you guys already answered what you think on the
yeah,
stalemate.
Yep.
and I'll also add, at this point, I'm sorry, the three of us are just guessing.
Yeah, we are
We're
totally
making
guessing.
educated guesses.
Yes, you
Yeah.
are
We
dead on the
are
money.
guessing.
Yeah, so I have like you guys are getting your stuff, say, from ISW and other sources. My stuff is coming from a lot of foreign policy guys from Europe, called the Duran, the Gaggle, a few other sources like that, who have a different perspective of things. But I think we learned a lot from each other. We have one last question here, and it's from Mimak, and he thinks he asked, if things are going so well, where is Sergei Shwagi, the Russian defense minister? I looked up; he did appear in a video earlier today. my personal bet, because the Russians don't ever tell you who's in command of these theaters, I think he's been sent to command the theater.
Yeah, I heard that same report, and my immediate thought was, this is disinformation one way or the other. I simply don't discount. I don't count it as being operationally relevant. If those who are hoping that it's a sign that the Russian high command is starting to crack, I'd say you're kidding yourself. It's wishful thinking. It's wish casting. And for those who say, that he remains in direct control and everything is going according to plan, same thing. This is wish casting. It's neither side's propaganda interpretation is accurate. Until we have more information, note it and move on to the next piece of information and assess it.
And an
go ahead,
individual really doesn't matter all that much. Just watch what's happening. The thing is that, he's a natural fall guy as a scapegoat, particularly since, let's face it, things haven't gone as well as the Russians had hoped. He might be commanding the battlefield. He might be being set up to be the one that's blamed for all of the errors in the campaign, even if the Russians eventually win, because the option is that otherwise it might fall on Putin having bad decisions. And
what better job for a general than to be fired for incompetence by their political masters?
So
is that not the existence of generals?
Again, it comes down to we're in, to a certain extent, Dave. This is we're trying to cast a Western view on this. This guy's position would be analogous. Well, what if the Secretary of Defense, suddenly showed up ostensibly in operational command, in our CENTCOM headquarters in Kuwait? And the fact of the matter is, well, okay.
Well, my understanding is the Russians have fully more integrated their military at this in a way that we don't. So it's like the Minister of Defense is also the head of the Joint Chiefs.
But that's the point. That's actually the point I was getting to. Is that we're trying to read. Is this analogous to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Okay, well, that's not an operational command. That's and I guarantee that his equivalent as the CENTCOM commander or the EUCOM commander is already there, already plugged in.
I do recall one thing that was an interesting thing after the first real Russian press briefing, and a reporter got up, a Western reporter went to the general and said, "General, given you failed all your military objectives, don't you think your campaign's going badly?" And his response was, "How do you know what our objectives are? We haven't told you any of our objectives." So it's just like, we're trying to guess what his objectives are. I think he is doing what he's doing. You think he's doing what you think he's doing. I think, and the other question from Mimak is this what Charlie Sheen says by winning? I certainly think most wars are definitely what Charlie says by winning.
The thing is that most wars are decided by who gives up last. And we don't know that yet.
I do have a question for you guys. There's been a lot of rumors circulating out of Poland, and certainly it sounds like at least one military briefing by the Ukrainian Joint Chiefs seems to indicate that they're seriously worried about this being a situation that certain countries that once owned parts of Ukraine that are part of NATO are looking to expand into their territory under the guise of peacekeepers. What do you think of that? Poland, Hungary, and Romania are the three subjects I'm hearing.
You've got me at a disadvantage. This is the first I'm hearing of that, and so I would just have to say, it's an old boss of mine who used to say, "That's very interesting,"
right?
And then say nothing more.
Right.
I simply don't know. This is the first I'm hearing it.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know. To me, it doesn't sound terribly plausible because the strongest guarantee those three countries have against Russian aggression is an intact, strong Ukraine. So
Yeah, well,
does that mean they won't act against their own self-interests?
or they
Companies,
have different
countries,
self-interests. That's
yeah,
the thing. Apparently, this is coming out of the words of the definitely the Polish deputy prime minister, who, from what I'm hearing, is actually the guy in charge of Poland, or at least the long government party is the one pushing for this idea of going into Lvov and Tarnopol.
Yeah,
got me
that's
on
very
that one.
interesting, but that's all
Yeah.
I can say.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
and I'll point out that was only part of Poland between 1922 and 1939.
I understand that, and that's it.
Well, but I mean, prior to 1795, borders were a lot
Right.
fuzzier
No, I
there.
understand that.
Oh, I'm saying that tongue in cheek.
So
I
Let's
know
just, I'll leave it there.
yeah,
Yeah.
there are people. Look, there's historical revisionists and governments in Europe who have ideas that probably we look at and say, "You got to be kidding," and then they do them.
Well, the twin curses of Europe are irredentism
Mhm.
and revanchism.
Right.
And until they can get past that,
Mhm.
they're just going to keep clotheslining themselves.
Well, Dave, did we answer all the questions?
Yeah, I think we got through all the
Okay.
questions through the list here. So yeah, I think we got through them all. And
Wouldn't want to leave anyone who took the time to submit. Gentlemen, I certainly enjoy the conversations.
right.
And even especially when we don't agree.
Yeah.
I always respect your opinion, and
Yeah.
particularly hearing something that's different than my own when it's well established and well found and well argued. I really do appreciate that. Thank you.
We really need to do that. Do this again next month.
Yeah, if there's still a war going
Yeah,
on.
we'll see where it's. Well,
one way or the
I
other.
will predict this. I think there's still going to be a war on. I could be wrong. Either of those two options, but I do think that 4 weeks from now, it's still going to be a war on.
I need this war settled by mid-May. I have a lecture to give on it in June. So,
well,
Ukrainians,
when are you giving?
solved.
Well, when and where are you giving that lecture?
I'll be giving it to the Origins War College at Origins Gaming Convention, and we're comparing it to when I proposed it. It's going to be comparing my war game that I designed back in the mid 2010s to what actually happened. So I'm hoping to see, because my war game postulated.
So, do you mind if I ask where is that going to be?
That'll be in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay. I'll be out of semester at that time, and I won't be, my wife and I won't be traveling until later in June. So if it's mid-June, if I can possibly put together, I'd love to come hear the talk.
Oh yeah, definitely. You should also definitely come up for Origins War Game Fair itself, because this is like massive war gaming center. We have a war college. We do all sorts of things there. It's like back before COVID, it was like 40,000 people would show up to game.
Oh, I can tell you some stories about the early Origins. So,
well, gentlemen, it's been as always very enjoyable. I'm glad we did this, and let's look forward in about 4 weeks' time.
Okay, sounds good. And everyone else, we'll see you in the comments on Ricochet.
And like the podcast, so we can get it on the front page.
Yes,
yeah.
Hit the like on the podcast so we can get it to the main feed.
Yeah.
Good evening.